You know, every skyscraper we build, every book we read, every single law we live by, it all has a beginning. We're going to trace it all the way back to a single starting point to find the very first seeds of the world we live in today. It's so easy to just take our crazy complex world for granted, right? But none of this, it didn't just magically appear. It all started with a blueprint, a kind of first draft for society, drawn up thousands of years ago in a place you've probably heard of, but you might not realize just how much we owe to it. And those seeds, they were planted in the rich, fertile soil of a civilization called Sumer. But get this, they weren't just planting barley and wheat. No, they were planting the ideas that would literally grow into our modern world. So the big question is, why there? Of all the places on Earth, why did history as we know it kick off in this one specific corner of the world? Well, the answer, as it so often is, comes down to geography. The ancient Greeks had a name for this place, Mesopotamia. It literally means the land between the rivers. And those two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, were the secret sauce. They'd flood every so often, and when the water pulled back, it left behind this layer of incredibly rich, nutrient-dense soil. For early farmers, this was basically paradise. It was the perfect incubator for a whole new way of life. I mean, for thousands and thousands of years, we were nomads, just wandering around. But then, after the last ice age, we finally figured out farming. And in Mesopotamia, farming was so unbelievably successful that people suddenly had way more food than they needed. This surplus, that was the key. It meant people could finally stop wandering and start building. First, it was just small villages, and then it was something the world had never, ever seen before, cities. And listen, we're not just talking about a big village. We're talking about a genuine, bustling city. This was a revolutionary concept that was about to change humanity forever. And the pioneer, the very first to do it, was a city called Uruk. At its peak, Uruk was home to somewhere around 50,000 people. Now, I know, that doesn't sound huge by today's standards, but 6,000 years ago, that was absolutely staggering. It was the largest gathering of human beings in one place in all of history up to that point. But think about it. This created a whole new set of massive problems. How do you feed everyone? How do you keep track of all the trade? How do you manage arguments and just keep the peace? How do you stop a city of 50,000 strangers from just falling into total chaos? The Sumerians answered all these questions not with philosophy, but with brilliant practical inventions. They didn't just build a city out of brick, they built a city out of ideas. Okay, so let's start with the most basic problem, accounting. Seriously, imagine trying to remember who paid their grain tax, who owes who how much barley, and just how much is left in the city's storehouses. Your brain just can't do it. Memory wasn't enough anymore. They needed a tool. And that tool was writing. What's so incredible is that it started for a really practical reason. It began as simple pictures, we call them pictographs, scratched onto wet clay tablets. So a picture of a barley stalk literally meant barley. But over time, these pictures evolved, becoming more abstract, way faster to write, until you get this sophisticated system of wedge-shaped marks we call cuneiform. It was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first spreadsheet. So tracking grain was one problem. But what about organizing the people themselves? In a city this big, you've got farmers, priests, soldiers, merchants, all these different jobs. How do you create a system where everybody knows their role and what they're supposed to be doing? Well, they invented social structure. Right at the top, you had the king, who was seen as the god's man on earth. Just below him were the educated elites, the scribes who could actually read and write that new cuneiform script. Then came the skilled workers and merchants, the middle class. They were followed by the vast majority of people, the farmers, the backbone of the whole operation. And at the very bottom, tragically, were slaves. It was a really rigid system for sure, but it gave everyone a place and brought a sense of order to this incredibly complex new society. So you've got order for your stuff, and you've got order for your people. But what about the biggest, most unpredictable forces of all? The floods, the droughts, the sun itself. To the Sumerians, these were all controlled by powerful, and often pretty moody gods. So how do you get on their good side? You build a stairway to heaven. Out there on the flat, endless plains of Mesopotamia, they built their own mountains out of clay brick. They were called Ziggurats. These things were enormous. They dominated the city's skyline. They were the physical and spiritual heart of the city, a place where priests could literally climb up to be closer to the gods and pray for everyone's survival. It was like a giant declaration to the heavens. We are here, and we want to connect with you. So the Sumerians had invented systems for economics, society, and religion, but their most powerful tool, writing, it turned out it wasn't just for counting barley. It unlocked something brand new, the ability to ask the biggest questions of all. Like, what does it even mean to be human? And that impulse led to the creation of the world's first great work of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This wasn't just some story. It was humanity's first real attempt to grapple with things like friendship, loss, and our own mortality. The whole thing centers on Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, who's super powerful but also kind of a jerk. So the gods create this wild man, Enkidu, to be his equal. At first they fight, of course, but their battle turns into this incredibly deep friendship. Together, they go on all these adventures and become legends. But then, tragedy strikes. Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh is just shattered. He's terrified of his own death, so he sets off on this desperate quest to find eternal life. But after this long, hard journey, he's told this profound truth. He fails. He doesn't find immortality. What he learns instead is that what truly matters is the life we live and the legacy we leave behind. Wow. And just like its hero Gilgamesh, the civilization of Sumer, it wasn't immortal either. After centuries of incredible innovation and growth, it eventually faded away. But its ideas, its inventions, oh, those never died. So what happened? Well, it wasn't just one single thing. The Sumerian city-states were pretty much always at war with each other, which really weakened them. This made them an easy target for outside invaders, like Sargon of Akkad. And then, the ultimate irony. The very irrigation that made them so rich eventually made their soil too salty to grow crops. It was a slow decline, really, a mix of conflict and environmental change. But even though Sumer itself disappeared, those seeds they planted were carried on the wind. Things like the very idea of a city, the invention of writing, the first written laws, the blueprint for how to structure a society. Even their stories, like a great flood myth, would echo in religions and cultures for thousands of years. Civilizations from Babylon to Greece to Rome, they all built upon the foundations laid right here in Sumer. And that is the ultimate legacy of Sumer. We are all its descendants. The fundamental structures of our world, from the cities we live in to the stories we tell, they have roots stretching all the way back 6,000 years to that fertile land between two rivers. They wrote the first draft of civilization. The real question is, what are we adding to it?